Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here because today we're going to unpack something that completely flips the script on how we define talent and culture in our organizations. We're taking a super focused, eye-opening look into workplace neurodiversity, specifically homing in on Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. If you've ever wondered just how much untapped potential is sitting right outside the doors of modern businesses, well, buckle up. The data we're about to walk through is going to permanently change how you look at hiring, management, and workplace inclusion. Let's get into it. All right, let's just cut right to the chase with a stark and, frankly, pretty urgent statistic: 42%. According to national research, nearly 42% of young autistic adults have literally never worked for pay during their early adulthood. I mean, really think about that for a second. We're talking about nearly half of an entire demographic completely sidelined from the workforce. It is a staggering loss of human capital, and it begs a very serious question about our systems.
So, what does this all mean? Well, let's dive into it. The central question driving our explainer today is right here. Why exactly is the modern workplace failing neurodivergent talent? Because, spoiler alert, the research is crystal clear. The issue isn't a lack of desire to work, and in most cases, it's not a lack of capability either. The harsh reality is that traditional corporate structures simply weren't built with neurodivergent people in mind.
Here's our game plan for today. We'll be looking at understanding autism spectrum disorder, the hiring hurdle, discrimination on the job, the neurodivergent advantage, and finally, building an inclusive workplace. I promise, we are building towards some incredibly practical HR solutions you can actually use. Okay, part 1, understanding autism spectrum disorder. Before we try to fix the workplace, we need a quick reality check on what ASD actually is, minus the stereotypes. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it visually breaks down the functional levels, which saves us from drowning in medical jargon. Autism is truly a spectrum. At level 1, folks might just require some basic support. Maybe they struggle a bit with kicking off social interactions. Moving to level 2, individuals need substantial support and often have narrower interests. And at level 3, people require very substantial support, which can sometimes include severe deficits in verbal communication. When we're talking about autistic adults jumping into the standard workforce, we're usually, though not always, talking about folks whose symptoms totally allow them to adapt and do exceptional work, as long as the right environment is there. And just to put that into perspective, we are talking about a massive chunk of the population. The CDC notes that around 1 in 44 kids in the U.S. is likely to have autism spectrum disorder. That's a huge, growing demographic across all racial, cultural, and financial lines. And these kids grow up. They become adults who want and absolutely deserve to be a productive part of the workforce. So how do these traits actually show up at work? You'll often see things like a really strict adherence to routines, a super literal communication style, and maybe some hypersensitivity to sensory stuff, like those awful fluorescent office lights or loud noises. But here is the absolute crucial takeaway. The vast majority of individuals with autism have average to above average intelligence. We really have to crush this myth that an autism diagnosis somehow means a person isn't intellectually qualified to do a job.
Moving right along to part 2. The hiring hurdle. Because being qualified and actually landing the job, those are two very different things. Here's where it gets frustrating. Discrimination often kicks in before an interview is even scheduled. Researchers actually sent out identical resumes to employers. The only difference? One resume disclosed an ASD diagnosis. The result was wild. The applicant who disclosed their autism got 26% fewer callbacks. And because of this massive initial roadblock, about 2/3 of autistic candidates are basically forced to hide their diagnosis just to get their foot in the door. Now, if they do get the interview, they run into another huge wall. This little anecdote brilliantly illustrates the sheer communication disconnect that happens during standard neurotypical interviews. Imagine an employer asking a standard kind of figurative question: what can you bring to this job? The autistic candidate, who processes language very literally, answers honestly: my briefcase, work boots, and packed lunch. It's kind of funny, right? But it hits the nail on the head. It reveals a profound structural flaw. The candidate isn't dodging the question or showing a lack of skill. They're just answering literally exactly what was asked. Because of this whole song and dance with corporate jargon and unspoken social cues, less than 10% of autistic candidates feel like traditional structured interviews actually let them demonstrate their skills. We are filtering out highly capable people simply because they don't speak fluent corporate interview. Part 3, discrimination on the job. Let's look at what happens when an autistic individual actually navigates that maze and gets the job. Unfortunately, the uphill battle doesn't just magically stop.
Data from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission shows that charges regarding autism have more than doubled since 2015. Doubled! This is especially bad in the service industry. The legal data is basically flashing red, telling us that workplace hostility toward neurodivergent folks is a growing crisis. And because of these hostile environments, look at where autistic adults end up. A massive 31-state study found that only 14% of autistic adults were actually engaged in paid work. Meanwhile, 54% were stuck in unpaid day programs, and 30% had no work or activities at all. These folks are being sidelined into unpaid setups, not because they can't work, but because traditional workplaces flat out refuse to accommodate them. Let me share this totally baffling case from New York back in 2019 that perfectly highlights this systemic failure. An employee with cognitive impairments asked for some extra coaching just to understand his tasks better. Instead of, helping him, he was given written warnings which he physically could not read or understand and was eventually fired. And the kicker? He was working at an employment program specifically meant for individuals with disabilities. I mean, no way, right? It just proves that discrimination and a total lack of basic accommodation can happen anywhere.
When you peel back the layers on why autistic workers leave, you find these hidden barriers everywhere. We're talking severe bullying, and not just from bosses, but from same-status peers. Workers report being punished or outcasted just for missing social cues, even when their actual work output is stellar. Some even face immediate disciplinary action right after disclosing their diagnosis. These right here are the top reasons autistic workers say they are quite literally forced to leave a job. Let's pivot to part 4, the neurodivergent advantage, because it is definitely time we reframe how we look at neurodivergent talent. Providing accommodations is absolutely not charity, folks. It is a razor-sharp business strategy. Autistic employees frequently bring exceptional pattern recognition, rock-solid memories, and an intense attention to detail. They drive innovation by bringing creative, highly unusual ideas to problem solving. This isn't just theory. It's exactly why massive global powerhouses like Microsoft and HP have specific recruitment programs for neurodivergent talent. They know these traits are huge business assets, especially in fields like tech and data. Which brings us to our final section, building an inclusive workplace. So how do we actually get there? If you're an employer, a manager, or in HR, grab a pen. These next steps are for you. It all starts by completely overhauling how you hire. Step 1, strip all that ridiculous jargon out of your job ads. Use plain language. Step 2, ditch the complex, highly social structured interviews and swap them for practical skill tests. Test what the candidate can actually do, not just how smoothly they can chat about it. And step 3, when you do interview, use short, direct, and literal verbal instructions to kill any chance of miscommunication. Once they're on the team, you roll out everyday accommodations. These are incredibly low cost but have a massive impact on reducing anxiety and keeping your talent around. Assign a mentor to decode the unwritten rules of the office. Allow them to use email or instant messaging instead of forcing stressful face-to-face chats. Try video modeling. Record a task on a phone so they can review it on their own time. Always provide meeting agendas in advance. And in daily chats, just avoid the irony, the sarcasm, and the idioms. Just say exactly what you mean. All right, that wraps up our explainer for today. But before you go, I really want to leave you with this provocative thought to take back to your own teams. Look closely at your company culture, your hiring practices, your day-to-day operations, and ask yourself honestly, is your workplace actually truly inclusive, or is it just built exclusively for neurotypical people? Unlocking all this incredible potential means we have to change the system, not the individual.